GM. How we living today, Farmer Joe, Robert, Mark?
Yep, GM. No, sentiment has honestly been never lower in the Bitcoin space. But that being said, we're all still here. We're all still kind of enjoying the ecosystem. We're all still holding massive ordinals and runes bag. I know Robert's flexing his brand new PFP, which is an alien node monk, which I couldn't recognize him. But yeah, no, all things considered, everything is great. And I know we have Mark here from Leather Wallet, which is another wallet on the Bitcoin L1 ecosystem, who was quite early in adapting their wallet from stacks to Bitcoin. And I guess without the critical infrastructure pieces like Xverse and Leather and a couple other wallets that came in early, we wouldn't necessarily have the vibrant ecosystem that we have today. So yeah, obviously, just wanted to kick off the show. Obviously, we're joined here by Arch Network. For those that haven't necessarily seen, there was actually an interesting piece by Bob Bodley. He's one of my favorite, I guess, contributors, researchers in the space. He's also a builder, and he's very technically savvy in terms of his broader understanding of crypto. Has a PhD, so really, really smart guy. And he had quite a lot of interesting things to say about Arch, and kind of, where it kind of stacks into the ecosystem between meta protocols, L2s, L1.5s, what have you. And yeah, obviously we have quite a lot of teams building on top of Arch, as we kind of mentioned in the past shows. But yeah, Matt, what's going on? Thanks for joining us as well. Wanted to kind of get your take on Bob's, initial writings and so forth. Yeah, I think a lot of people are still kind of relatively confused as to where the heck you guys stack up. Is it an L2? Is it an L1? And it kind of is a mix of everything, which is kind of why I think like the L1.5 story fits into what you're building. But yeah, I wanted to see if you had anything to say on Bob's take. Okay. Maybe
Dude, I
not.
agree with that take, though. If you really break it down.
No, but I mean, maybe we can start with Robert. I know you were shadow banned for a little bit, so I was on the Ordinal show or actually just yesterday, and Leo mentioned that he wanted to cover kind of the Satflow story. Obviously, the Satflow account is a massive win in terms of how many people took notice, and in my group chats, in a bunch of these like alpha groups, primarily from like the EVM side, we had a bunch of people who were just like, oh, this is just like blast blast referral links all over again. um, I guess to you, like, was it modeled around Blast? Did you take inspiration from Blast? Wanted to kind of get your take on like how you were thinking about this kind of reveal to the market approach, which seems to have worked by storm, and a lot of the NFT traders are talking about Sapphire now.
GM, thanks, Farmer. Yeah, had some issues yesterday. I think just due to the growth of all of our associated accounts from announcing actually two big announcements a couple of days apart. So last week we came out of stealth for Satflow. We announced our seed raise. We raised 7.6 million to build pro trading tooling on Bitcoin L1 here. Super excited to be building in the space, and we're actively hiring. So shoot me a DM if you're sort of ordinal and rune enthusiast or Bitcoin developer. But yeah, on Friday we also announced our waitlist for the platform. So Satflow is a pro trader Bitcoin DEX, and we opened up the beta waitlist to kind of retroactively reward folks in the space that have been trading for the past 6 months or so, or a little longer, more like 8 months, and reward those users with Satflow Flux points. So the model is pretty simple. If you log into the platform, you sign a message, and you can stake your claim on points, and you can also get additional points for inviting others and yeah, it seems to really have been exciting so far. A lot of folks, connected to the waitlist and getting involved. And for us, we just wanted to try something a little different. Not a lot of folks in the ordinal slash rune ecosystem have leveraged BIP 322 signatures, or more plainly, just sign in with signature and kind of add a gamification element. Our intent really was to just kind of proliferate Zapflow and bring some awareness to what we're working on. And obviously, we're very excited to launch it more broadly for everyone in the community. So we're hoping to do that as soon as possible. But yeah, thanks for having us on.
Yeah, I guess I think like the big kind of hitting item, is that a variant, which is a top tier fund in the space. Obviously, there's quite a few heavy hitters in the space, but I think one of the most interesting investors on the list of names was really Coinbase, Coinbase Ventures to be more specific. I know that they've backed Bitcoin L2s in the past. I forget which one that they were involved with. It may have been Mezzo, or it may have been Bob. I'm not too sure. I think it may have been Bob, actually. So it's not necessarily the first Bitcoin investment per se, but I believe that's their first Bitcoin investment into an L1 uh, builder. Wanted to kind of get a bit more alpha on, like, what was that conversation like? Is Coinbase looking at this space in greater kind of intent? What do they know based on some of these conversations? Maybe you can share some perspectives that they had towards the Bitcoin ecosystem on a broader level.
Yeah, absolutely. It did seem like the timing was pretty good. Obviously they announced a deeper involvement on the base side with a wrapped BTC product, and in all the conversations we've had with them, they're super excited as to what's going on with the sort of resurgence in developer activity around ordinals and runes, and they're certainly paying attention to what's going on within the ecosystem. Not sure if I can really share too much more beyond that, but they're very much aware of all of these meta protocols and developments, and are paying very close attention.
Yeah, no, I think we all love to see it. Obviously, the big thing is, runes tokens as a token standard, haven't necessarily played out as anybody kind of envisioned them. I think at this point, when was it having? Around, was it having actually at 420? I think it was pretty close to it, but we're like 4 months in. We're 4 months in after Casey dropped runes and opened up UTXO based fungibles on Bitcoin as a meta protocol, or I mean, it's not really a meta protocol, is it? It's kind of adjacent to one. But that being said, I mean, we're 4 months in. We still don't necessarily have tier one exchange listings. Obviously, runes, you're still struggling because everything's still in order book format. Are you guys kind of looking at runes as an integration to the potential product, or I guess a lot of people are just wondering, is this an NFT ordinals focused, trading platform, much like Blur was predominantly, I guess entirely. Yeah, just wanted to get your take on that, and then Isabel, would love to have you up here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're still really excited about runes. We still think by some big metrics such as developer velocity, that it is a winner on the fungible as a fungible token standard on L1. I obviously that we've had a sort of big decline since the halving, and I do think that we need some future catalysts to bring some attention back. You noted one of them, which is the order book style of trading, which is a big gap at the moment. But there are definitely some others, like trustless bar lends, kind of lending like more traditional DeFi products, but in a true decentralized manner. Smart contract like functionality is really needed, I think, to bring some excitement back to the runes standard. And I do think we'll get there. I don't know exactly what it will look like, whether it will be, something like opcat enabling added functionality for these assets. And by the way, that applies for ordinals as well. Or, a tier one exchange listing could go a long way. I know if we saw any of the major exchanges list or acknowledge the Rune standard, that's obviously going to be very, very good for, the ecosystem and growth and new development. So we're eyeing all of these as prospective changes, but on the SatFlow question you asked, we're taking just a very agnostic approach to these standards. We're starting with ordinals and runes, but yeah, because that's where the majority of the trading activity on the L1 is today. But obviously BRC20 values by market cap are still very high, even despite low trading activity on the L1. By the way, that probably gets fixed when we add more interesting DeFi products that support BRC20 on the L1.
Actually, lastly, before we get into Isabel, I wanted to ask, like, between runes and BRC20, are you familiar with kind of like the value split on like a week to week basis in trading activity? I think that's an interesting kind of note. I think a lot of people foresee a lot of the BRC20 OG, let's call it Domo's vision, as I call it, BRC20 Classic volume to potentially make their way onto BRC20 Lorenzo's vision, aka Fractal. Yeah, apparently I had a lot of likes on that post. But yeah, I guess on the L1 itself right now, what is kind of the percentage split between fungibles?
It's a great question. Obviously, from a market cap standpoint, even the largest BRC20 ticker is Ordi still, and Ordi alone accounts for the entirety of the value of runes and more. But on the trading side, this is what's interesting. Like as far as L1 trading activity, like on major marketplaces, existing dexes like Unisat, Magic Eden, all of the others. I believe, napkin math for the last 30 days, it's like 70% runes, 30% BRC, and the numbers look even more disparate if you look at unique numbers of users. I think it's more like 80-20 there. So as far as people actually sort of owning, getting excited about their assets, and even developer activity, I think has some correlation to these numbers. Like people are very excited and are building on runes primarily. And you noted the fragmentation with Domo's vision versus Lorenzo's vision. This is, maybe just a byproduct of the fact that there is this sort of like competing incentive structures and competing leadership, whereas runes is very clear cut. It's like the indexer is Casey's ordinal client, right? That is the de facto standard. Like it doesn't look like anyone's really trying to make waves at competing with that. People, I think, see runes as just a very sort of safe, easy, fungible token standard, and that's it. And for any additional functionality, we'll need to see opcat or any other L1.5 solution, any other potential smart contract functionality, like really change that, right? That's just, I think, like the difference between BRC20 and runes is BRC20 is trying to do sort of everything. They're trying to handle all of the DeFi logic and all of the rules, like, by the leadership, by the protocol developers.
I mean, just to be clear, we're talking about Lorenzo's vision, BRC20, not Delmo's vision.
Yes, I mean, honestly, it's a good sort of like difference in nomenclature between them. And I really would be curious to hear from Isabel on her take here, because I know she's been kind of battling the standard leaders for some time. There are these basically two competing entities. You've got Isabel's L1 Foundation, right? Set out with a charter of proliferating these standards that live on top of the ordinal standard and shepherding new functionality through. But then you have Unisat, which is a juggernaut startup that has obviously massive influence on user activity day to day because unisat.io is so big. So we're starting to see a little bit of fragmentation, but optimistic that everyone here can kind of pull together and make BRC20 continue to be great.
Yeah, no, love it, Isabel. Happy to have you up here. Obviously, you're doing a lot. You've done a lot in this space. I think most people know you by now, but maybe just like a brief introduction on all the things that you're working on would be helpful for the audience here that might be new to you. I know I've stopped on the Mario spaces that you and Asher and the rest of the gang kind of run with Robert. So we're obviously very familiar with one another. We've chatted for the better part of a year now or more. But yeah, I'd love to have you kind of just make a quick introduction and join in your takes too.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So for folks who don't know me, so I got involved in the space very, very early on. I was super lucky to help Casey with his communication strategy when he launched Ordinals. And then after working with Casey, got to do a bunch of different stuff in the space, most notably working with Domo and UTXO management on a liquid trading fund for ordinals called Unbroken Chain. And then also I work with Domo on the Layer 1 Foundation, which is the BRC20 Governance Foundation. It's a nonprofit that essentially is mandated towards supporting building and adoption of BRC20 and basically supporting builders and users and supporting the BRC, development of the BRC20 ecosystem, amongst, other educational initiatives we do around meta protocol development and other sort of, kind of technical projects that we get involved with. So, to your point about BRC20, I think that one of the big differences between Domo and Casey, or between BRC20 and Runes, is that Runes is sort of this like ossified, very specific thing. Casey is not going to make changes to it. It is what it is. It's on layer 1 and that's that. Whereas I think Domo is much more open to both working with the lead maintainers of BRC20, which includes Unisat and Best in Slot, around, potentially doing things like implementing swap modules into BRC20, which is something that the team is working on really diligently right now. I think that that's been a little bit slower than we would like, primarily because Unisat does have their hands full right now with Fractal, and Unisat was the initial architect of the swap module for BRC20. And then also the programmability module, which essentially introduces a VM into the BRC20 indexer and makes core BRC20 programmable. That is like a massive, huge game changer. That would essentially make BRC20 EVM compatible on the actual indexing layer of core BRC20. And yeah, I think my sort of opinion about that is like people are, kind of underestimating how big of a change that would be and like what that would open up for BRC20 if made possible. But again, it's a little bit far off and unclear if that's definitely going to happen or not, right? That's definitely in sort of the spec phase, in the sort of docs phase, not as much in the building phase yet. So we'll see what happens there. As a practical matter, though, I think that Domo is very open and really excited to work with builders, to work with, L2s, to work with technologies that want to support BRC20 integration so that BRC20 is easy to integrate into applications. I think there's a lot of talk about how like Runes is easier to build with. And I think that that is probably the case if you're only working with these assets on L1 at the UTXO or inscription level, as the case may be with Runes and BRC20. But once you have, kind of like functioning programmable interoperability, once you have VMs involved with these integrations, like the whole conversation is just completely different. Like you're talking about like an incremental amount of easier to build with to like an infinitely amount of easier to build with. So yeah, I think BRC20 and Runes are actually on like really different paths as it stands, because just of the differences in attitude towards like Casey's sort of view of the world and Domo's view of the world. Obviously, Casey is like pretty Bitcoin only. Domo comes from the Ethereum world and really wants to see things like DeFi built. I think that's my impression, is that he really wants to see DeFi built with these assets. So yeah, that's my take there. If anyone has any
Yeah,
questions about that, happy to answer. Yeah.
no, definitely appreciate that. I mean, I think the core theme of anyone building on Bitcoin right now is we're pretty much tapped out in terms of what we can do, as far as, functionality goes, based on the current specifications and restrictions of the L1. And so we're all trying to work towards bringing more expressivity, whether that's smart contracts, whether that's, potentially moving to a side chain, or building, your own side chain and so forth. Like, there is a lot of philosophies around it. And I guess, one that I think is interesting to think about is, should BRC20 just be a simple token standard and enable the rest of the crowd, let's call it additional meta protocols, which bring smart contracts to Bitcoin, be it something like, the alternatives, or just wait for OpCat to come out, or, maybe just get front run by the opportunity that Arch brings to the table. I think as a token standard, if we look at any other chain, a token standard has historically been agnostic to, the rest of the ecosystem. And, I think, when you start to work with BRC20 to integrate smart contract modules and so forth, then you're really building a vertical within Bitcoin in itself. And, sometimes that makes it quite a bit more difficult for the other builders to be interoperable with you. And I think, Charlie and I share a very similar view of Bitcoin today. Is it's just perpetual chaos over the last month or so. Not only has sentiment been relatively low in the crypto space in general, this is not exclusive to Bitcoin, or Bitcoin price for that matter. But we're at a stage where there's a lot of people experimenting with various things, and social consensus hasn't necessarily formed just yet as to what the next unlock looks like and where the users will go. That being said, I do share a much broader, TAM view of Bitcoin as a market, where many of these can be successful, much like we have many L2s be successful on EVM environments. And, based on what your requirements are as a builder, as a user, you will just gravitate to, an ecosystem that is, best suitable for your functionality use case as a Web3 user. But over time, obviously, this industry is bound to grow, and the adoption curve is very much at an inflection point for Bitcoin, to my kind of perspective. But we haven't necessarily had that leg of growth in a long while. So I'm kind of looking forward to that next move of social consensus, where a net new environment allows people to play some games, I suppose, without it turning up like Merlin did, where it was a very short-term game, which is my primary fear of Fractal. I think a lot of people are hyping it up right now, both on the Western side and on the Eastern side, and of course, there's some back bias associated with that. But I think, there are some builders looking at OpCat and building on Fractal as a test net for potential, Bitcoin L1 unlocks. But as a builder, I guess the question is, why even go to Fractal in the first place? If you want to, I would say, build on the highest value proposition in the long term, short term narratives, and schemes aside, I think the most serious builders are closest to the L1. Um, and that's kind of where I see the biggest value capture. And any of the L2s right now still haven't necessarily captured the L1 audience. So they're solving for maybe the EVM users to come to Bitcoin, or a Bitcoin adjacent ecosystem, where Bitcoin is the dominant, base layer asset outside of, ETH, for example. But they're not necessarily capturing the L1 users. So I kind of view them as two separate environments. Mark, you just raised your hand. What's going on?
Yeah, I just want to speak to that a little bit. At Leather, we're sort of in an interesting, maybe fairly unique position, because we started off as a wallet for the L2, for an L2 for Bitcoin stacks. And last year we swung very much towards the L1 as far as our focus. And I think I agree with that sentiment that you're sharing and others here as well. That on the L1, I think what we're seeing is an exhaustion of possibilities, at least for the very short term. We're trying to figure out what's next for the L1. And from our perspective, it's been sort of an interesting dynamic because we found ourselves originally in L2, then going very much L1, and now back to L2. But not with the mindset of building exclusively for an L2, because I think you're right. The L2s in general, I mean, Stacks, I think being one of the sort of longest standing ones, hasn't really spoken to the L1 focused market. And that's a very interesting sort of observation. I think that's a key problem for us to solve. And I think that's being solved on a certain level when it comes to the protocol design of Stacks. There's some upgrades going on later this year as far as getting Bitcoin wrapped over to Stacks in a trust minimizing way. But we're going to have to tackle this problem, not just on that protocol level, but also on higher up app level and the wallet level as well. So I think it really behooves us. I'm very much interested in seeing what happens with BRC20 and programmability on L1 in general. But I think we're placing more of our bets these days back on the L2 side for Stacks, but with the mindset of we have to really figure out really good bridging. Because I think if users can't go between L1 and L2 and do so in a very frictionless, cost minimized way, then I think we're gonna remain serving two different markets. Like you say, there's L2 sort of speak to the Ethereum folks, roughly speaking, whereas the L1 is more of a Bitcoin purist market. I think we really need to figure out how do we merge those two markets as far as an audience for
Yeah, for sure. And I think it was actually Domo which brought BRCs as a concept over to the Stacks ecosystem. So I mean, like, obviously, recognizing that there's no smart contracts on the L1 and increasing the amount of functionality that you could do on something like Stacks was maybe not as major of an unlock as bringing BRC20s to EVM and even SVM as a concept, primarily because Stacks is still kind of a growing ecosystem with, I wouldn't want to say a limited amount of users, but I almost want to think at this point in time, ordinals and runes may actually have more users than Stacks. I don't know if that's true. Maybe you have a better idea in terms of number of wallets, and number of like activity between the two chains. Wanted to kind of hear your take there.
Yeah, well, I think in this very current moment, I think like you were saying, the market sentiment is low in general across crypto, and I think that affects both Bitcoin and Stacks. And so I actually think I could check the logs to verify this, but I think that actually Stacks on our end is just these days higher than Bitcoin, and ordinals and everything else on the L1 side. However, it does fluctuate greatly month to month. So if we went back a few months to the pre-halving, I think ordinals was very much dominant at that point in time. But I think both ecosystems are in a place right now where they are looking for that next catalyst. And I think looking for the more sustainable use cases and sort of post-speculative moments. And I do think that I think the theory we have, or the thesis, is that the L1s and L2s need to complement each other. You need to have L1 durability, assets really saved for the end of time, but L2 functionality. And until those two worlds are really hooked up together, I think we're going to sort of have these periods of speculative growth, and they're going to die off, and they're not going to be terribly reliable. And so I do think that there's sort of a similar sort of set of problems on both sides. They're different functionally, of course, but I think actually from a marketing perspective, they have similar struggles that they're going through at this point.
Yeah, no, love to see it. I mean, personally, I'm just in a state of like curiosity at this point in time. I'm obviously very curious how the Fractal experiment goes, if they manage to attract any sort of developer talent, and functionality and applications across Fractal when it goes live on mainnet next month or so. But then I'm also really excited about potential unlocks on the Stack side with the Nakamoto upgrade, which is to most people's view, I would say long overdue, especially as it's been promised over and over again. But obviously, maintaining the fact that things kind of went wrong on the Alex side, with the exploit and so forth. Maybe coming at a time where it doesn't necessarily align with a large downside event on the chain itself, may be beneficial for it as an inflection point and so forth. But then obviously the LTU competition is I would say very competitive at this point. You have Mezzo, Bob, Botanics, and probably a dozen to 2 dozen other L2s that are building it with a similar type of view in mind. A lot of them have been just conduit, one-click rollup types of chains, which I'm not necessarily too keen on per se. Actually, someone mentioned this to me yesterday that optimism is actually needing to hard fork based on a potential exploitable opportunity, not necessarily to user funds as a perspective. But it just goes to show you that, I guess there is this risk element that a lot of these optimism based rollups now have to go through, because maybe they took some shortcuts in the process. Obviously there's some more serious builders that have used the OP stack to incubate and build their chains, and I'm less concerned about those. But more so like the shorter sighted builders, which we're thinking about this as a market opportunity to build something quickly, with maybe limited scope in terms of longevity associated with it, may be affected towards the downside, which obviously makes me nervous. I see Arch dropped off. Bunzi, anything else that you're looking at these days? Just kind of curious on what your takes. Infrastructure wise, you're a big proponent of making it easier to build on the L1. Obviously, Laser Eyes as a wallet connect solution. You're close with Leather, Xverse, and other wallets, and I'm sure that you're trying to make it easy for builders to integrate every single wallet in their, I would say, product suite. Wanted to hear more about the infrastructure side and the greatest, I would say, friction points as a builder. Wallets are one thing, indexing is another, but yeah, just curious on how you're progressing with the Laser Eyes thing.
Yeah, so um, with just building on Bitcoin, there's so many nuances and there's a lot of people kind of gating knowledge simply because people want to be first to market and kind of get their product out first. But one thing that we found when building OmniSet kind of early is just like, and then watching all these other products emerge, everyone's writing the same code, to connect wallet and to do these to craft a PSBT, to send Bitcoin, to sign a message. But each team, like, there's little nuances between each one, and that makes it extremely difficult to for each developer to come build something. If you go to Ethereum, you have Rainbow Kit, you have WagMe, you have Wallet Connect. It's really easy to come or enter that ecosystem and quickly start building applications. And Bitcoin, that's just not the case. I mean, simply because it's only been about a year since, Ordinals has emerged and there's been this like gold rush phase, I guess you can say, of people coming and seeing the opportunity. But the friction's just really high. So we thought like, why let's open source this. Let's go ahead and it's like a grow the pie situation. Let's go ahead and open source this code that everyone's writing and maintain it, and keep it. If a wallet makes an update, we push it live, and anyone that uses Laser Eyes, it handles that for them. Um, and so we've been doing this and integrating wallets, and like the only other one is Sats Connect right now, and that's made like with Xverse, and they're always going to prioritize Xverse. So we wanted to democratize that and like have all of them. So we have Unisat, Xverse, and then we just released a version today with that now Leather jumped on board and saw what we were doing and was like, yeah, this makes sense. Let's get more people tools to not only build new applications, but to make it easy to just start building on Bitcoin, getting all of the fucking wallets in one place, and not having this. Because anyone that's built an app here, there's just all these little small nuances. So we went ahead and handled that, and yeah, it's really cool, like connecting with other projects that really see the approach of just not only democratizing it, but just open sourcing and lowering the barrier of entry. Because once we get there, we're going to see, a lot more breakthrough apps. We're going to see a lot more users. But but yeah, we're stoked. We actually have that push up live. It's like version 0.03, and that's now live. But I mean, it's been really fun working on that, and I feel like it's attracting the right people. Like Layer One Foundation, Domo, has been supporting, and like Isabel there, and they see, we'll be using Layer One as like a discussion board of like, hey, what do you guys want to see next on this? Because we are still really early. And yes, proprietary software is a good approach, but why Bitcoin was successful? It was open source, and it was very transparent. And it also, and why Ordinals was successful, it was a protocol. There wasn't a token associated with it. It wasn't, and we're really looking at it from like, we need more tooling open source for people to come in and not have to go through all of these troubles. And yeah, so by like hopefully by the end of this month, we'll have all of the wallets.
Man, I
You
thought
know,
I thought I thought you were gonna say the end of the year, but yeah, no, that's a massive undertaking and achievement. I mean, you brought this up before, and it's a really good point. It's all about incentive structures, and I forget who maybe kind of brought this up too, and maybe it was Robert about BRC20, Domo's vision versus Lorenzo's vision. But it's all about incentives, and I think like Bitcoin as a chain and its users and its builders, the, I would say fundamentally speaking, most libertarian and I guess capitalistic in some ways. But when you don't necessarily have incentives to build open source tooling, it makes it really hard to actually bring these things to life. And I guess I'm kind of curious how you guys are trying to solve that problem. And Isabel, maybe you can kind of talk to the Layer One Foundation as to, who are some of the contributors to the Layer One Foundation. Because a lot of these things are open source initiatives, and on the EVM side and even SVM side, I was talking to Harry, for example, from Ordinal's wallet, who basically built everything from scratch. He was saying, he's really excited to be building on Solana these days with his, pumped up fun alternative that allows you to create a pump coin with a single click based on a tweet. Obviously, very degen, very interesting, novel, and it's coming at a time where pumped up fun is no longer the flavor of the month or flavor of the quarter. um, but again, like it all comes down to incentives, right? And if we don't necessarily have people in this industry, in this space, funding some of these open source initiatives, which don't necessarily have a monetary benefit or token affiliated with them. And quite honestly, a token doesn't need to be applicable to everything in the space. Just because you build tooling doesn't mean you need a token, because then you need to build an economic system around that. And not everything in the space needs to be decentralized. Like code in a GitHub that people have been doing over and over again to solve the exact same problem should be shared and open source to the public. It's kind of how things work, if I'm not mistaken, on EVM, and why it's kind of gained so much traction. And you ask any EVM builders, like, how did you build this product? It's just like, oh, well, there's a lot of proprietary code here in the smart contracts. But there's just a lot of libraries that they were able to leverage to build exactly what they need. So I'm hoping to see more of that in the Bitcoin space. But again, like, who's funding these foundations and research initiatives? And how are we going to get Bitcoin to have the infrastructure required to, kind of get us from a builder's perspective to make it easier to get acquainted with Bitcoin? Isabel first, and I guess Mark after.
Yeah, just to quickly pop in, I mean, I think this is a really, really good point. Like, pretty much all projects and anyone here who's involved with sort of building protocol level technologies will know that all of these projects from these other ecosystems, like most of the open source projects basically get funded by foundations, like the Ethereum Foundation or Solana. All of these different layer ones have foundations, etc. And I think that's something that I can't speak to in too much depth because this is definitely something we're brainstorming. It's actually something that if people have ideas about, I would love to like talk to you and hear about it. But I think, something that we're thinking about as a layer one foundation is like, how can we advocate and basically work with foundations to basically potentially get, open source code projects that, support the BRC20 ecosystem funded, because we, the layer one foundation, are a nonprofit. We don't have these like crazy like investors, right? That all of these other protocol level technologies do. And so I think that like something that, yeah, that's something that we're thinking a lot about is like, okay, we want to remain nonprofit. We've chosen to remain nonprofit, but perhaps, we could include something like advocacy for grants as part of our like mandate or something that like we can do to support the ecosystem. And I think if there are folks out there who want to build BRC20, adjacent or related projects and have specific ideas of who they want to build, we might be able to at least help you brainstorm about ways that you could potentially get that funding in a creative way, potentially through another organization, if not us, and just like, be supportive of you in that uh, effort. So yeah, I think that's something we're thinking about deeply, and it's a really, really important point.
Yeah, it sounds like we just need to, talk to the miners and make sure that 2% of all block revenue goes into this foundation fund. No, just joking, but it's a it's an interesting concept. I mean, like, you would want to think about it this way as a miner. If you had this spur of innovation on the base layer, then you certainly have way more upside for fee revenue in general, outside of just the block reward. So I think as a miner, you're naturally incentivized to have more base layer activity because, your revenues are very much dependent on it. And ultimately, the state of Bitcoin over the longest run, when you reach a block reward of zero, really depends on the network to be self-sustaining in some capacities. Obviously, we're still in an inflationary environment, and the ETH people absolutely love to tear Bitcoin apart, saying how Ethereum is an ultrasound money simply because it's deflationary today. But as we've seen with the Ethereum token price, the only thing that's been deflationary is the actual token price itself. Mark, yeah, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to maybe echo support for the whole idea of laser eyes and the need for an SDK. There's a lot of JavaScript focused developers that we've seen pour into the space in the last couple of years, and I'm actually kind of surprised that this hasn't happened before. I think from last February when things really blew up, this was already a problem. We had app developers having to repeat the wall connection user experience over and over and over again. Tons of people that were pinging us all the time asking for help and libraries that didn't exist. And so we're just a huge fan of the effort at Leather and excited to help move it forward. And there are these questions around funding, and we're happy to be a sponsor and do our part. I think there's a lot more that can be done. I think this is sort of from my perspective, like the starting point. But the realm of JavaScript SDK capabilities that Bitcoin developers need is pretty vast. I think we've seen a lot of developers struggle, for example, with constructing PSBTs reliably, so they work with various wallets, and that should be painless. That should be something that we have tooling for that allows developers to get apps off the ground within days and not have to bring their hands over the details of UTXO management. So that's a little feature request, I suppose. But yeah, really excited. I'm also a big proponent of this being run by independents, in the sense that I don't think a wall provider like ourselves should be the ones providing this, because there would be an inherent bias. And so super supportive of independent, impartial sort of development on these things.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, you nailed it, because like right now, if a developer wants to start, they're using Sats Connect, and like they're always going to prioritize X first, and as I guess they should. But yeah, I mean, it is super exciting, and what I'm excited about is we're doing a hackathon as well, and like a lot of EVM developers are like, wow, this is how you craft a PSBT, because like in laser eyes it crafts it gets them going, and that learning curve, it's like someone that's used to driving like an electric car, and you're like, yo, here's a skateboard. Like, it's much simpler. It's it's a weird comparison. I hope this works. First time trying to use it, but like they're so used to a very fast chain, a very everything used in a different way. And when they first start to attempt to build on Bitcoin, it is fucking just rocks and chisels. And that is the whole goal. And like it is super cool to see that type of support, and we're super excited. And we have a lot a lot of other updates just getting tested, and it's all open source, so feel free to like pull it down. Write any issues. Like we are integrated with Ordinals bot as well. They just released a template on the front end side, and right out of the box you can even inscribe. We have an inscribe button where it's just like, so I think it's not the sexiest tool. It's not like the, like something like, oh, here's a dex, or here's like a, perpetual pools, or here's something super crazy. But it is a very fundamental play and fundamental approach to democratizing it. And we've even been in touch with Pedro from Wallet Connect, and just standardizing this thing at a much higher level is going to allow for very, very like sustainable growth. So yeah, I mean, if you're a builder and if you have any questions, or even if you're not, like, try to use it. That will help us write better docs for it, because just try to mess around with it. Any feedback is good feedback. And yeah, it's really exciting. Like, just we we got a lot more wallets pretty much almost done. Leathers is going to be cool, because it's also going to allow us to start exploring stacks and how we can make it easier for people to potentially integrate and work on layer twos. Like, could be a great, like, we've even been talking with Arch too. It's like, to get people to build on Arch or on stacks, if you give them a place to begin and give them proper documentation to work through it, it allows them to quickly use, like, in their toolkit, these other tools, writing methods that are like, okay, deploy smart contract, I can sign this signature, it hits all of Arch Networks systems, it hits all of Stacks networks, like programmatically hits them all directly in the right order. And yeah, it's exciting. But I do have a question for Isabel too, as like BRC20s have been going, there's been discussion around the upgrade. And I feel like there's so many discussions flaring up, but that one's that's, I feel like, just been quietly on the sideline. And first, if you had your hand up before, so feel free to comment on that. But I would love to hear what the BRC 20 upgradable roadmap, or what, not roadmap, but fucking, I hate that word. Just like where it's at.
First off, I just want to say that I really love this analogy of like Ethereum as an electric vehicle and Bitcoin as a skateboard. I think it's pretty apt. Yeah, I mean, another thing that I often explain to people about that, just because I think it's such an important point, is like most people who are quote unquote building on Ethereum are not actually like building at the blockchain level. Like, they're building on a virtual machine, they're building on a computer, they're building on EVM. Whereas like when you're building on Bitcoin, you are legit building in the blockchain. Like, you are like building, like working at the UTXO level. It's just like way, 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 way deeper into the engine. So it's like it's almost like it's basically a totally different thing. Um, so yeah, but anyway, to answer your question about BRC20, I mean, right now I think so I think one of the confusions about the layer 1 foundation that I think is helpful to clear up is just like what the actual organizational structure is of BRC20, and this was very intentionally created for a lot of reasons to reduce things like centralization in the decision making of BRC20. I'm sure many of you may remember several months ago there was sort of like, kind of arguments and infighting about what to do with the indexer. And some people wanted to take the indexer one way, and other people wanted to take the indexer another way. And so we were trying to solve kind of on a human level, on kind of like a federated level, how do we reduce those kinds of challenges and decentralize decision making around BRC20 as much as possible. And so the way that ended up working out was Layer 1 Foundation was created. The Layer 1 Foundation basically is a governance organization that managed the BRC20 protocol governance structure. The governance structure includes Unisat and Best in Slot as co-lead maintainers of BRC20. Domo is the president of the Layer 1 Foundation and obviously heavily involved in decision-making processes with Best in Slot and Unisat. And then there's an oversight committee that's made up of, I think, 8 or 9 different organizations that played very, very important early roles in the development of the indexer, of the BRC20 indexer, that also all comment and contribute and give feedback on BRC20 developments. So the governance process is very human, but it is as decentralized as it can be on that kind of human level. And right now, I think one of the challenges that BRC20 faces, that's sort of just like a trade-off of having this sort of decentralized nonprofit structure that is really designed to serve users first and foremost, is that pretty much everyone involved has their own companies and has their own jobs and has like other stuff going on, including Unisat, right? Like Unisat is working on Fractal. That has nothing to do with BRC20 Core. It has nothing to do with Layer 1 Foundation. That is Unisat's completely separate project that obviously will support BRC20, but it's a completely separate initiative. And so I think that's, just sort of like a reality of kind of the way that our governance structure is things can be like a little bit slower than if you're just like one person hammering out decisions all by yourself and you have a bunch of investors just paying you to work on that one thing. So as a practical matter, I think, Unisat sort of has their hands tied up with Fractal. It sounds like that's going to be launching very soon. Sounds like that's going to be probably out in the next couple weeks, is my understanding. And we're very, very close as a group to having code done for a swap module update within BRC20 Core, which will be different than kind of the swap functionality on Fractal, because the BRC20 Core swap module will be completely all Layer 1. There will be no L2 requirement at all. And then programmability is the next like sort of major upgrade that BRC20 Core maintainers want to integrate into BRC20 Core. And that's the VM integration that would like effectively make BRC20 EVM compatible, programmable, etc. I think, yeah, I'm a little hesitant to give like exact like dates around these things. I think Domo would kill me if I did that. But I think that the goal is to have these things done in, some months, right? Like the goal is for like us not to be waiting on a million BRC20 changes for years and years, right? The goal is to get these 2 major upgrades done, primarily the swap and the programmability module, and then kind of ossify BRC20. I think that is, the vision as of now.
Love it. Yeah, I mean, so what was that? That was September 7th. It's
Is
gonna.
that when Fractal?
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm
Oh
just trolling.
man.
But I mean, I guess the biggest thing that I've been really kind of like that's been grinding my gears, I guess you can say, is everyone's thesis on DeFi on Bitcoin is the addressable liquidity. And ever since we've approached here, like BRC20, like I think just innately did so well because of its radical transparency and the first time of fair distribution. Runes attempted it, but I think the pre-mine kind of went back to the, Ethereum ways of team allocations and kind of poor distribution. But now we're seeing like fractal, and now we're seeing basically off that term, like fractionalized LP again, where like if we're using Bitcoin as a metric for addressable liquidity, and then you continue to fractionalize it, we're gonna see the same thing that happened on Ethereum with like Optimism, Arbitrum, and all these different chains, getting decent TVL, but not very like significant deep liquidity for like DeFi superpower to truly unlock? And I'm just curious of like, is like anyone can kind of answer if there is one, is do you think we're just going through an exploratory phase and the cream will rise to the top? Or do you think we're just going to continue to follow these, this is the best way because, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now we just have all these bridged or trust minimized, like kind of fractionalization of all these tokens. I just, that's like one of the biggest concerns I have currently of like DeFi on Bitcoin. I mean, Robert, you're working on a DEX. How are you thinking about this? Like, how are you thinking about, getting capital efficient, like contributors to provide LP to make a swap even viable?
Yeah, so the L1 trading landscape is really tough. You've got a lot of constraints, but they're very Bitcoin native constraints, and you do get the upside of the liquidity. Like more in simple terms, like you get to use Bitcoin natively on the L1 in DeFi products on Bitcoin L1, right? Which is fantastic, right? It's just raw Bitcoin on the most secure, largest, biggest chain, right? The downside is you've got these 10-minute block times that make doing anything on DeFi very constrained and susceptible to MEV in violent price increases or declines, right? But I think that's why we're all here, is that you can own your Bitcoin on the L1 and use it for DeFi, even if it's a little rough around the edges, right?
Yeah, no, totally agree. Bunsey, I know you have to drop off a little bit early. So I think we'll just kind of go to our like last segment of our usual show, just to kind of open the floor to any questions from the audience.
Farmer, could I just ask Robert one last question
Yeah.
before you dropped earlier, I wanted to just ask, could you just give like a quick TLDR on like what makes SapFlow different than Magic Eden, and like kind of what maybe some of the killer features are that you're going to be, offering that makes it like quote pro trading?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's definitely pro farmers with Flux.
Okay, cool. I want to know like what is special about SatsFlow versus Emmy or other trading platforms.
Don't we all? Unfortunately, it's still in invite-only private beta, but I can share a few things that we've committed to. The big ones are like sniper tooling, like really sophisticated, advanced transaction construction in real time, and a full awareness of what's going on in the mempool in the context of both your wallet and the assets that you're trading. Right?
Is it very resilient, or is it like easy to get around, like anti-sniper tooling? Like how resilient is this anti-sniper tooling?
It's the best. So, a lot of folks don't know, but SapFlow's quietly coordinated the majority of MEV activity on Bitcoin over the past 6 months. Our users have paid out over $1 million in fees directly to miners in their MEV activities. So we built a very robust set of tooling around the kind of sniping problem. And honestly, I'd love to show you more about SapFlow and talk more about it openly. Obviously, we do want to launch, and we're very keen to show the world what we've been building. And we will be adding people to the beta marketplace in order of your position on the leaderboard. So definitely get farming. Invite your high volume trader friends that trade a lot of ordinals and runes to the platform, and yeah, we'd love to give you and everyone access, as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think we're all. I mean, whoever was early, most definitely likes the Flux element. We're still kind of curious as to, I guess, how many Flux there are circulating. But it looks like the top 10 have in excess of 5,000 Flux, which I'm sure could translate to something more down the line. Yeah, I guess the last section of the spaces, of course, is just kind of an all hands, open spaces, no hands type of environment. Just to kind of wrap up the show, if anyone has wants to join as a speaker, let me know. Whether it's Johnny, I know we kind of spoke on the DOTSwap side. Frogtoshi, which I met in Hong Kong. Yeah, great guy, by the way. It was an awesome time, and I love my my frogs hat too. Or even script or S script. I know we kind of spoke on the fractal side a little bit more as to what's going on. Yeah, anyone else wanna hop in and kind of join as a speaker? Kind of, yeah. Feel free. Otherwise,